The man who forgot how to smile, Sebastian Cross, sat on the familiar Central Park bench. His expensive suit, a stark contrast to the weathered wood beneath him. 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days, that's how long it had been since he'd last truly smiled. Not the practiced corporate expression he wore in boardrooms, but a real smile that reached his eyes. At 31, he commanded one of the world's largest technology empires. Cross Dynamics had revolutionized artificial intelligence, making him worth $47 billion. He owned properties on 5 continents, could influence global markets with a single decision, yet he couldn't buy the one thing his heart craved: peace. The bench had become his sanctuary. Here, among the autumn leaves and distant sounds of children playing, nobody recognized him as the tech mogul whose face graced magazine covers. Here he could breathe, without the suffocating weight of expectations. As evening painted the sky in shades of amber, Sebastian noticed someone approaching his solitary refuge. A young woman with paint-stained clothes and worn boots settled at the other end of the bench. She carried a battered sketchbook, her fingers moving gracefully across the page as she drew. "Beautiful evening," she said softly, not looking up from her work. Her voice carried a gentle accent that spoke of distant places and sunshine. Sebastian's throat felt rusty from disuse. When was the last time someone had spoken to him without an agenda, without contracts and billion-dollar deals hovering in the background? Yes, he managed, the single word carrying more weight than any shareholder presentation he'd ever delivered. She glanced at him then, and Sebastian felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the kinder of warm honey, filled with a kindness he'd forgotten existed. There was no recognition in her gaze, no sudden calculation when she realized who might be sitting beside her. She simply saw him as another person sharing a bench in a beautiful park. "I'm Luna," she said, closing her sketchbook and extending a hand marked with charcoal and paint. "Luna Martinez, Sebastian," he replied, taking her warm, calloused hand in his own manicured one. For the first time in years, he didn't offer his last name, didn't mention the company or the fortune. As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip lower, Sebastian found himself studying Luna's sketches when she reopened her book. Her drawings captured the soul of the city faces, full of emotion, landscapes that spoke of places far from the concrete jungles surrounding them. The simplicity of the moment struck him like a physical blow. Here was someone who owned nothing of monetary value, yet seemed to possess everything he lacked: joy, purpose, peace. And for the first time in 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days, Sebastian Cross felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward in the beginning of what might someday become a smile. The artist's heart. Luna reopened her sketchbook as the evening grew cooler, and Sebastian caught glimpses of her extraordinary talent. Each drawing seemed to capture something beyond the surface: the weariness in an old man's eyes, the hope in a child's smile, the longing in a woman waiting for someone who might never come. "You're very talented," Sebastian said, surprising himself with the genuine compliment. He'd grown so accustomed to speaking only in business terms that praise felt foreign on his tongue. Luna smiled, and Sebastian felt that strange warmth in his chest again, like something frozen beginning to thaw. "Thank you."
Art doesn't pay the bills, but it feeds the soul.
Sebastian didn't know about soul feeding. He'd built his fortune by feeding machines with data, creating algorithms that could predict human behavior better than humans themselves. The concept of nourishing something intangible felt completely alien. What kind of bills? He found himself asking, then immediately regretted the personal question. But Luna didn't seem offended. "The usual," she said with a laugh that held no bitterness. "Rent, groceries, art supplies when I can afford them. I work at a coffee shop in the village during the day, paint at night. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." The simplicity of her life struck Sebastian powerfully. Here was someone who owned nothing of monetary value, yet radiated contentment he hadn't felt in years. When had he last experienced joy, purpose? Before his mother's death, certainly. Before the company went public and his father's expectations became an impossible weight. "What about you?" Luna asked, turning to face him fully.
Ass.
"What brings you to this bench on a Tuesday evening?" Sebastian hesitated. How could he explain that, despite owning a $50 million penthouse, he felt most at home on this weathered bench? That surrounded by strangers who wanted nothing from him, he could finally disappear. I like the quiet, he said, which was true, if incomplete. Luna nodded as if she understood perfectly. The city can be overwhelming. I come from a small town in New Mexico, Esperanza. Population 800 on a good day. My grandmother still lives there, raises chickens, and tends a garden that produces the best tomatoes in 3 counties. The love in Luna's voice when she spoke of her grandmother was something Sebastian hadn't heard in years. His own family interactions were boardroom meetings disguised as dinner conversations. You miss it, he observed. Every day, Luna admitted. But dreams don't grow in small towns. At least, not the kind I have. I want to show my art in galleries, maybe teach someday. Help kids discover they can create beauty even when the world feels ugly. Sebastian found himself leaning forward, drawn by her passion. When had he last felt passionate about anything beyond quarterly profits? What about your dreams? Luna asked, her honey-colored eyes fixed on his face with startling intensity. Dreams. Sebastian almost laughed at the concept. He hadn't allowed himself to dream in so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like. I'm not sure I have any anymore, he said, the honesty surprising him. Luna studied his face for a long moment, and Sebastian felt as if she were seeing straight through to the hollow place where his heart used to be. Everyone has dreams, she said softly. Sometimes we just forget how to listen for them. Coffee and confessions, a cool breeze rustled through the remaining leaves, and Luna shivered slightly. Without thinking, Sebastian shrugged out of his wool. Jacket worth more than most people's monthly salary, and offered it to her. I couldn't. Luna protested, but Sebastian was already draping it around her shoulders. Please, he said, and something in his voice conveyed how much he needed to do this small kindness. Luna settled the jacket around herself gratefully. Thank you. That's very kind. Kind. When had anyone called him kind? Ruthless, brilliant, powerful, these were the adjectives that followed his name in business journals. But kind belonged to a version of himself he'd thought was lost forever. They talked as the park grew darker around them, their conversation flowing naturally. Luna told him about her art, about how colors could convey emotions that words couldn't capture. She spoke of her grandmother's stories, growing up in a place where everyone knew your name and community meant something deeper than networking. Events. Sebastian found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, how his mother used to read to him every night, creating voices for characters that made stories come alive, how her death had felt like someone turning off all the lights in his world, leaving him to navigate by the cold glow of computer screens and quarterly reports. She sounds wonderful, Luna said, her voice thick with emotion. I lost my mother when I was 15, cancer. I'm sorry for your loss, Sebastian said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Thank you. I'm sorry for yours too. Luna reached out and touched his hand briefly, a gesture so simple and genuine that Sebastian felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. They sat in comfortable silence, but this time the quiet felt shared rather than solitary. The first time in years, Sebastian wasn't thinking about the company, about his father's expectations, about the weight of responsibility. He was simply present in this moment with this extraordinary woman who had appeared in his life like grace he hadn't known he needed. I should probably head home, Luna said eventually, reluctantly. Early shift tomorrow. Sebastian felt panic, flutter in his chest. He wasn't ready for this to end, wasn't ready to return to his empty penthouse and the cold comfort of his success. Would you like to get coffee sometime? He asked, then immediately felt foolish. Coffee, as if something so simple could bridge the gap between their worlds. But Luna smiled, and Sebastian felt that ice in his chest crack a little more. I'd like that, she said. There's a little place in the village where I work, Rara. Coffee. Do you know it? Sebastian didn't, but he would find it. He would have moved mountains to find it. What time do you get off work? 6 tomorrow evening, if you're free? Free. Sebastian almost laughed. He had a board meeting at 5, a conference call with investors at 7. and 17 other commitments his assistant had orchestrated. But looking at Luna, seeing the hope in her eyes, he realized none of those things mattered as much as being wherever she was. "I'll be there," he said, and meant it more than any promise he'd ever made. Luna stood reluctantly, shrugging out of his jacket and handing it back. Her fingers brushed his as he took it, and Sebastian felt electricity shoot up his arm. Thank you for this evening, Sebastian. I haven't talked like this with anyone in... ... Well, a long time. Neither have I, Sebastian admitted. He towered over her small frame, but somehow she made him feel less imposing, more human. "Thank you for letting me share your bench," he said. Luna laughed a sound like silver bells in the evening air. "Our bench," she corrected. As she walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness, Sebastian remained standing by the bench, his jacket still warm with her presence. For the first time in 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days, Sebastian Cross smiled.
It was
A small smile, tentative and rusty from disuse, but it was real. Tomorrow, he would find Aurora coffee. Tomorrow, he would see Luna again. And maybe, just maybe, he would begin to remember what it felt like to dream. Two worlds collide. Aurora Coffee sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a flower shop on a narrow Greenwich Village street, the kind of place tourists walked past, but locals treasured like a secret. Sebastian stood across the street at exactly 5:45 p.m., watching through windows that hadn't been cleaned in weeks as Luna moved behind the counter with practiced grace. He'd spent the entire day thinking about her, much to his assistant Patricia's confusion when he'd canceled 3 meetings and left the office 2 hours early. "Mr. Cross, you have the Henderson call at 7, Patricia had reminded him. "Reschedule it," Sebastian had said without explanation. How could he explain that for the first time in years? Something mattered more than business. The bell chimed as he entered, and Luna looked up from the espresso machine. Her face lit up with genuine pleasure, and Sebastian felt that familiar. Warmth spread through his chest. "Sebastian," she called out, finishing a drink before walking around the counter to greet him. "You came?" "I said I would," he replied. Suddenly aware of how overdressed he was in his $1,000 suit among students in torn jeans and artists in paint-splattered clothes, Luna seemed to notice his discomfort. "Come on, let me introduce you to Roberto. He owns this place." Roberto turned out to be a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and hands permanently stained from years of handling coffee beans. He looked Sebastian up and down with the shrewd gaze of someone who'd seen every type of person the city had to offer. "So you're the man who's got our Luna glowing like sunshine?" Roberto said with a thick accent that spoke of islands and warm beaches. "She's been humming all day. Haven't heard her hum since she started working here 6 months ago." Sebastian felt heat rise in his cheeks as Luna laughed. "Roberto, stop embarrassing him." Over the next hour, Sebastian watched Luna work. She knew every regular customer by name, remembered their orders, asked about their families. She moved through the small space like a dancer, turning the simple act of making coffee into something approaching art. When the evening rush died down, Luna finally had time to sit with him at a corner table that wobbled slightly under the weight of their cups. So she said, studying his face with those perceptive honey eyes, "What do you really do, Sebastian? And don't say you like quiet, I can tell there's more to your story." Sebastian's throat tightened. He dreaded this moment, knowing it would change everything. But Luna deserved honesty. "I run a technology company," he said carefully. "Cross Dynamics."
Oh.
Luna's expression didn't change immediately, but Sebastian caught the moment recognition. Flickered across her features. Cross Dynamics was everywhere. Their AI systems powered everything from smartphones to medical devices. "You're Sebastian Cross," she said slowly. "It's not a question." "Yes." Luna leaned back in her chair, and Sebastian felt the careful distance she was already putting between them. The Sebastian Cross. The billionaire. "Luna, please. No wonder you can afford to cancel meetings to have coffee with the help," she said, her voice carrying a hurt that cut through him like a blade. "It's not like that," Sebastian said desperately. "Yesterday on the bench, that was the most real conversation I've had in years. You saw me, not my bank account or my company." "Because I didn't know who you were," Luna said, standing up. God, I told you about struggling to pay rent, about working double shifts. You must have thought I was pathetic. Thought you were. Extraordinary, Sebastian said, standing as well. I still do. Luna was already untying her apron, grabbing her jacket from behind the counter. I need some air. Sebastian followed her outside into the cool evening, his heart pounding. Luna, wait. Oh. She turned on the sidewalk, her eyes bright with unshed tears. What are we doing here, Sebastian? I make barely enough to survive, and you? You could buy this entire neighborhood without checking your bank balance. What future could we possibly have? I don't know, Sebastian admitted. But I know that for the first time in years, I feel alive when I'm with you. Isn't that worth something? Luna studied his face for a long moment, and Sebastian held his breath, waiting for her to walk away forever. Instead, she surprised him. Show me, she said quietly. Show you what? Your world. If we're going to figure this out, I need to understand who you really are. It's not just the man on the bench, but the billionaire everyone else sees.
That's June.
Felt a mix of hope and terror. His world was cold, calculated, dominated by people who valued him for what he could give them rather than who he was. But if it meant not losing Luna, he would risk exposing her to all of it. Okay, he said. But I warn you, it's not a pretty picture. Luna reached out and took his hand, her paint-stained fingers intertwining with his. I'll be the judge of that. The true value of everything Sebastian's penthouse occupied, the top 3 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper. Its walls lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Luna stood silently in the marble foyer, taking in the cold perfection of it, all the modern art that costs more than most people's homes, the furniture that belonged in museums, the complete absence of anything personal or warm. It's beautiful, she said finally, though Sebastian could hear the note of sadness in her voice. It's empty, Sebastian replied, leading her to the main living area. I bought it because my financial advisor said it was a good investment. Lived here for 3 years and never once felt at home. Luna walked to the massive windows overlooking Central Park. In the distance, she could see the bench where they'd first met, now just a tiny speck in the sprawling green space. You can see our bench from here, she said softly. I know. I bought the place partly for that view, though I didn't understand why at the time. Over the next few hours, Sebastian showed Luna glimpses of his world. The home office with 6 monitors displaying global markets and company data, a walk-in closet filled with identical expensive suits, the dining room table that had never hosted a meal with friends, only business dinners that felt more like hostile negotiations. Where do you eat? Luna asked, noticing the pristine condition of the kitchen. I usually have something delivered to the office, or my housekeeper leaves. Prepared meals in the refrigerator. Luna opened the massive refrigerator to find it stocked with gourmet meals in glass containers, each labeled with heating instructions. No leftovers from cooking experiments, no half-empty containers of milk, none of the beautiful chaos that came from actually living in a space. Sebastian, she said gently, this isn't a home. It's a very expensive hotel room. That night, they sat on Sebastian's terrace, overlooking the city, sharing takeout Chinese food that Luna had insisted they order from a place she knew in Chinatown. It was the first meal Sebastian had eaten in his apartment that hadn't come from his housekeeper, and somehow it tasted better than any 5-star restaurant he'd patronized. Tell me about your dreams, Luna said as they watched the city lights twinkle below them. The ones you had before you forgot how to have them. Sebastian was quiet for so long that Luna thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke. I wanted to help people, really help them, not just create products that made money. My mother used to volunteer at a children's hospital, and she'd come home with stories about kids who were so brave, so full of hope despite everything they were facing. I thought technology could solve problems, make life better for people like that. What happened to that dream? My father happened. After my mother died, he pushed me to focus on profits, market share, beating the competition. He said, helping people was a luxury we couldn't afford until we dominated the industry. But once we dominated, there was always another mountain to climb, another company to acquire. Luna reached over and took his hand. It's not too late, you know, to remember who you wanted to be. Over the following weeks, Sebastian and Luna began building something neither of them had expected. Luna showed Sebastian her world, the community art center where she volunteered on weekends, teaching kids from low-income families how to express themselves through painting. Roberto's coffee shop, where regulars were treated like family. A small gallery in Soho where Luna dreamed of showing her work someday. In return, Sebastian began making changes. Started a foundation focused on bringing technology, education to underserved communities. He moved his morning meetings to allow time for actual breakfast. Most importantly, he began listening to that small voice inside that remembered what it felt like to dream. 3 months after their first meeting on the bench, Sebastian made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He stepped down as CEO of Cross Dynamics, transitioning to chairman of the board and dedicating most of his time to the foundation. His father was furious. The business press called it a career suicide. The stock price fluctuated wildly for weeks. But Sebastian had never been happier. "Are you sure about this?" Luna asked as they sat on their bench one evening, watching the same autumn leaves that had witnessed their first conversation. "I've never been more sure of anything," Sebastian replied. "I spent years building an empire, but I forgot to build a life. You reminded me what living actually feels like." Luna smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "Your mother would be proud." "I think she would be." And Luna, "Yes, I love you. I know our worlds are different. I know it's complicated, but I love you." Luna turned to face him fully, her honey-colored eyes bright with tears. "I love you too, Sebastian. Not the billionaire, not the CEO. The man who gives his jacket to strangers and remembers his mother's bedtime stories." 6 months later, Sebastian proposed to Luna in the same spot where they'd first met. He'd had a custom ring made by a local artist Luna admired, using a small diamond set in recycled gold. It wasn't the massive stone his wealth could have afforded, but it was perfect for them. Their wedding with small Luna's grandmother flew in from New Mexico. Roberto closed the coffee shop to attend, and Sebastian's few real friends mingled with Luna's artist community in a beautiful garden ceremony. Sebastian's father attended, still disapproving but beginning to understand that his son had found something more valuable than stock options. As they exchanged vows, Sebastian looked into Luna's eyes and realized that true wealth wasn't measured in billions or properties, or market dominance. It was measured in shared laughter, in comfortable silences, in the way someone's presence could make you remember who you were meant to be. Years later, as they sat on their bench watching their own children play in the park, Luna would sometimes sketch her husband's face. In her drawings, Sebastian was always smiling, not the practiced corporate expression, but the real smile he'd rediscovered the day a mysterious girl sat beside him and taught him that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, only found. And in the margins of her sketchbook, Luna would sometimes write the words that had started it all. "Beautiful evening." Knowing that it had been more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. The end.